How can you make a good first impression on a seller? It's going to happen if you're buying a practice that you're going to see a practice that you're interested in. You're going to see numbers that impress you. You're going to look it up on Google Maps and get excited. Inevitably, part of the process is to meet a seller face-to-face. And when you meet that seller face-to-face, this is a key moment in the process to ensure the transition goes smoothly, that you're the buyer that gets picked, and that this purchase works out very well for you, both in the long term, of course, but in the short term as well. There are some key questions that I want you to focus on during this first meeting. I have 4 of them. I'm going to talk you through them right now. The first question I want you to focus on is, what is the culture like in this office? Culture is such an important piece of a successful dental practice, and it shows up nowhere in financial statements, nowhere in any report from a broker, nowhere on Google Maps. Culture is such a foundational piece, though, that talking about the culture of a practice with the seller is going to tell you a lot about what the seller values, what they feel like is true, even if it may or may not be true. And it's going to help you zero in on whether or not you're going to be a good fit in this office. Sometimes sellers will talk about nothing but production and collections, and other sellers talk about nothing other than a family atmosphere and patients who have been coming for 30 years. Neither one is necessarily right or wrong. They just fit different types of dentists with different types of goals. So you need to be clear about what it is that you value in a practice and where you feel comfortable. And hear the seller talk about their culture and how you may or may not fit in. The seller, when they answer this question, they're going to give you information. And it's an easy thing that I've seen a lot of buyers do, where they will ask follow-up questions that either sound skeptical, or they sound like they don't believe the seller, or they want to really dig in. They think the seller may be trying to pull a fast one on them. This is such a bad idea. Again, the purpose of asking the seller questions is to establish rapport, get a sense of information, establish a relationship. Yes, there will be plenty of time to dig into the nitty-gritty details of a practice as you're going through the process. But in this first question, you're asking about culture, keep those follow-up questions positive. Keep the seller interested and let the seller know that you appreciate what they've done to create the culture in the office, whatever that culture may be. The second most important question I hear buyers consistently ask sellers when they make a good first impression during that first meeting is, hey, tell me about your treatment philosophy or your treatment style. As a non-dentist, it's hilarious to me to see the amount and the variety of opinions in dentistry. As a non-clinician, I always thought dentistry was this cut and dry scientific process, which I'm sure as a dentist you kind of chuckle at my naivete. So ensuring that your treatment philosophy lines up with the seller is similar to the culture question. You want to know, is the dentist's culture and how they treat and how they view patients, how they communicate with patients, is that similar to how you're going to do things? That treatment philosophy, you're going to have an easy sense telling whether or not your treatment philosophy lines up with the sellers and whether or not it's going to be an uphill battle to take over this practice and treat patients who've been used to a specific type of dentistry, or if you'll fit really nice and neatly with that seller and their style, and patients won't feel such a whiplash between the old dentist and the new dentist. The third question I recommend you ask is, what do patients consistently say about your office? Again, this is technically a neutral question. You're just asking what patients say. You could argue this is another form of the first question, the culture question. But now you're asking the question from the perspective of patients, and the dentist's answers here are really telling about how they view the practice and how they view their patient base. Most times, sellers will say a lot of positive things about what they hear from patients, which is completely natural, totally normal. Again, this is not a chance for you as a buyer to really catch the dentist in some Google review you saw that was negative, that you think that they're sweeping under the rug, that maybe the seller isn't focusing on in this first meeting. The goal of this question is simply to hear what the dentist thinks patients value about their practice. The fourth question I have for you is such a layup. It is, How have you been so successful in this practice? Bonus points if you can reference something that you liked about the practice before you showed up to this first meeting. You could say something like, I noticed your collections have been so consistent over a number of years. How have you been so successful in this office? Or you could say something like, what really stood out to me when I looked at the broker report the first time was your profit margins. You run a very lean office. How have you done that? How have you been so successful in your office? This question, it's a layup because, again, the goal of the first meeting is to establish rapport, is to solidify the idea in the seller's head that you're the right buyer for this office. Earning goodwill with a seller is something that can only help you through the process of a transition. From the first meeting with the seller, you are under no obligation to buy the practice. So establishing a rapport with a seller has zero downside to you. You can choose to move forward or not with the practice based on the information you get in this meeting, subsequent due diligence that you're going to do in the office. So asking a dentist how they have been successful, number one, acknowledges the fact that the seller has run an office that you're interested in buying. Chances are, yes, it's not a perfect office, but who cares? You're interested in buying it, so by definition, there is something that you admire about this practice. Don't be shy about laying on the praise. As a bonus, this seller may share information with you that will be helpful for your entire career. There's no downside here. Focus on the positive. To summarize, there are 100, 200, maybe 1,000 questions that you need to answer before you pony up huge money to buy a practice. But in the first meeting with the seller, your goal isn't to uncover every bit of information possible. Your goal in a first meeting with the seller is to establish rapport, get a feel for some of the intangibles like culture and what patients say about the practice, and to establish yourself as the best buyer for the office. And the best buyer for the office, yes, sometimes may be the one that pays the most, but not always. You'll be interested to know that many sellers I've seen work with will choose the buyer that they feel is the best fit for the office, not necessarily the one who has the highest offer. In this first meeting, focus on the positive and just focus on those 4 questions as a great starting point. If you go meet with a seller, ask these questions, and get information that you'd like to talk through with someone, or you're coming up on a first meeting with a seller and just want to bounce some questions off someone, I'm here as a resource for you. Feel free to reach out to me on my website, dentalbuyeradvocates.com, where you can find a link to my calendar, you can find my email and phone number to directly reach out.